What's going on, everybody? Happy Friday. We are now only a week away from the halving. We're going to talk about some spot Bitcoin ETF news. We also have further developments with the spot Bitcoin ETFs coming from Hong Kong. And we're going to talk about how Bitcoin is setting up this pattern on the chart as we approach the halving. And let's start off with Bitcoin's chart. Bitcoin is still trading in this pattern. It's creating higher lows, but it's finding resistance at its previous all-time high. Keep an eye on this pattern. If we break it to the upside, we're going to set new all-time highs. That could bring further momentum as we approach the halving. Now, if we break this support level, if we happen to do that, we might also be breaking our 50 MA. And then we'll have to see how Bitcoin tests its previous lows, the 65,000. And if we somehow get there, the 60,100 area. As we approach the halving, any pullbacks you have to take advantage of. Bitcoin is in an overall bull trend. You want to buy the dips. Now, I might not have mentioned this in the intro, but I also want to talk about the halving and how we're very likely to see diminishing returns as we have seen as we get through each halving throughout Bitcoin's lifetime so far. Now, I'll leave this article down below for you because it does cover some other things, but I mainly wanted to focus on the diminishing returns part of this article. And one thing to realize, is as Bitcoin's market cap grows, it's going to be very, very hard to see more and more multiples on it. These gains, they do diminish over time as we get into each following halving. The first Bitcoin halving was a 93 times return from the halving day price to the top of that cycle. The next halving was a $638 Bitcoin. The day of the halving, its top price was $19,333, a 30x return, a third of the previous cycle. Our last Bitcoin halving cycle, we saw an 8x return. Bitcoin was 8,500 nearly at the halving day price, and it peaked out at right around where we're at now, $69,000 nearly. Now, just going based off of what we have seen in the past, we see about a third in terms of the multiples. We see a third in terms of the performance compared to last cycle. We went from a 93x to a 30x to an 8x. Just based on the trajectory here, we're probably looking at somewhere around a 3x from the price of Bitcoin at the halving. I think that would make sense. Going from about 70,000 or so at the day of the halving to about $210,000. While it might sound crazy, honestly, it's pretty reasonable when you look at the past performance of Bitcoin. And while obviously that price is much higher than we've seen previously, the multiples are much smaller. I do personally think seeing a $200,000 Bitcoin is pretty reasonable to expect. That doesn't mean it's a sure thing. That doesn't mean it's gonna happen no matter what. But I do think this cycle we do have the potential to see a $200,000 Bitcoin. Hey, maybe it's more. Maybe with the spot ETF buying demand, we see more than a 3x return. We see more than 1/3 the performance we saw in the last cycle. But just based on history, I think it's pretty safe to expect somewhere around a $200,000 Bitcoin. But I think above all else, what's more important is the timeline of the halving. For example, if we're already seeing a $200,000 Bitcoin by this summer, I don't expect it, but if we were, for example, I would say we're probably going higher than 200,000. If by this summer we're not even at like 80,000, which I would expect us to be over 80,000 by then maybe we could expect less than a $200,000 Bitcoin by the peak. So, as we get through this halving cycle, as we get through towards 2025, depending on where Bitcoin goes from now till then, you're obviously going to have to adjust your expectations as we see how Bitcoin does in the coming months to a year or so. But what do you guys think? Do you think we're going to see diminished returns like we have seen? Or do you think this is going to be different than the previous cycles? I personally do think a $200,000 Bitcoin is somewhat reasonable. Now, we also have an article going over the spot Bitcoin ETFs. Blackrock's spot Bitcoin ETF has crossed 15 billion in net inflows, and ibit is now in the top 100 of all exchange traded funds by assets under management. And as said by Eric Balchunas, ibit is now up over 50% and has taken in 15 billion in new cash in 3 months. Both of these numbers are double any other Blackrock ETF, and they have 421 of them. This shows how much demand there is on these spot Bitcoin ETFs. This is making clear waves, and other countries are obviously watching. But we'll get into that and go over what's going on with Hong Kong in just a second. We did get an update there. Now, as for yesterday, BlackRock's ibit, we saw inflows of 192 million compared to outflows of 124 million from gbtc. They are getting closer. Now, given the fluctuations in Bitcoin's price, BlackRock's ibit has already reached 15 billion in AUM, or assets under management, on March 12th. And it's now closing on 20 billion. And we'll look at both ibit and gbtc, and we'll see what progress has been made there. As you guys might know, if you watch previous videos, I do suspect they're going to flip, and it's going to come very soon, probably right around the halving. Check this out. BlackRock's ibit now holds 266,000 Bitcoin. And by assets, BlackRock's ibit is now in the top 100 out of 3,500 ETFs. And it only did this in 3 months. The scary thing is, where is ibit in 9 months, 12 months? Are they at 1 million in Bitcoin holdings? I do think they'll get there. And the newborn 9, excluding GBTC because they're selling. You know, if you wanted to include them, they would be nearly 1 million Bitcoin in holdings among all the ETFs. Excluding GBTC, all the other funds hold 524,000 Bitcoin, 500,000 Bitcoin, 1/40th of the total supply. But you have to consider how much Bitcoin is locked up, how much Bitcoin is never to be found again, how much Bitcoin is lost in translation. I would argue that they're probably closer to over 1/20th of the overall supply of Bitcoin. GBTC has now been cut in half, sitting at 316,000 Bitcoin from around 619,000 Bitcoin. As their Bitcoin holdings dwindle down, they will have less and less of an effect on the market. And who knows, you know, maybe the outflows start drying up and we start seeing inflows from GBTC soon. And maybe what causes that is them finally lowering those fees, which they have said they will do over time. Now, before we get back to the spot Bitcoin ETFs, I do want to show you what Grayscale holds versus ibit and how close they are getting. We got to talk about Hong Kong. And according to this article, Hong Kong could approve spot Bitcoin and Ether ETFs as early as Monday. But then we have some conflicting information. I don't know if it's a typo or if I'm missing something here, but Hong Kong may approve spot Bitcoin and Ether ETFs as soon as Friday suddenly, with possible trading by the end of the month. However, the approval timeline isn't fixed and could be changed at the last minute. I think the important thing here is don't worry as much about the day that it's going to happen. Worry about, is it going to happen or not? Hong Kong's approval of the ETF products is seen as one of the biggest market-moving events for cryptocurrencies and could establish Hong Kong as Asia's leading digital asset hub. That's basically it for the article. CoinDesk reached out to certain people and they declined to comment. I do think we're going to see Hong Kong spot Bitcoin, maybe spot Ether ETFs, and they should be coming pretty dang soon. Now, I want to show you guys Grayscale and ibit from their direct sites. Grayscale is updated as of 4/11. Current assets under management, $22.2 billion. And then we have ibit sitting at $18.7 billion. Now, as Bitcoin's price adjusts, these funds' net assets obviously adjust, but they're sitting right around $3 billion away from each other. As we continue to see inflows from ibit and outflows from GBTC, these will soon cross. And I do think this is very likely to come in the following days after the halving. And like I've said, the market might see this as a huge positive turning point. When ibit finally does flip GBTC, it basically indicates a huge change. As GBTC's assets under management shrink, they will have less and less of an effect on overall Bitcoin's price. And I do think they will get to a point where the sellers leave and then we're just left with the people that are willing to hold GBTC, maybe the fees lower like I said. But I do think regardless of all that, they will eventually flip. The halving is now only 1 week away. And while Bitcoin might not just rally right out of the gate, this is the biggest Bitcoin catalyst. Soon, the incoming Bitcoin will be cut in half. And soon, I do think this is going to cause Bitcoin to see new all-time highs again. We're going to continue to see net inflows from the Bitcoin spot ETFs. We're going to continue to see other countries talking about spot Bitcoin ETFs, adding to even more buying pressure. And this bull run will continue. You know, you got to consider, from the day of the halving till Bitcoin's peak, maybe we only do see a 3x. Maybe we get to 200,000. But if you were buying Bitcoin during 2022, during 2023, when Bitcoin was 15,000, when Bitcoin was 30,000, when Bitcoin was under 40,000, you're still looking at a good amount of multiples there. That is why you get in early. You don't wait until the halving. You buy during crypto winter. You buy while the prices are low. That was the best time to buy. The next best time is now. But thanks as always for watching, guys. Let me know what you're loading up on. I know I didn't mention the Bitcoin miners, but you got to be taking advantage of them. I do think the clock is ticking. Thanks again, guys, and I will see you on the next one. Enjoy your weekend.